Hello, channel family. What I'm about to tell you today isn't just a story. It's the raw truth of how my life, which I thought was firmly anchored in faith and purpose, was utterly shattered, then rebuilt by God's grace. I need to share it because I truly believe many of you have faced something similar. A betrayal so profound it shakes your very foundation and tests the limits of your spirit. My name is Michael Sterling, and I'm 48 years old. A man who, for over 2 decades, had the immense privilege of serving as a priest at St. Jude's Parish. This wasn't just a church, it was a vibrant inner-city sanctuary, the beating heart of our community, where I dedicated my life to guiding souls, offering comfort, and tirelessly working with the less fortunate, always striving to embody God's boundless love and make a tangible difference in the lives around me, truly believing I was walking the path Christ set before me. The deep trust my parishioners placed in me was a sacred bond, something I held dearer than anything else in this world. In today's story, you'll discover how I, a man who had sworn his life to God and his community, was publicly disgraced and falsely accused of a heinous crime orchestrated by those I once considered brothers in faith and companions on the spiritual journey. It all began on a seemingly ordinary Sunday during our joyful morning Mass, when my entire world crumbled right before the eyes of my beloved congregation. Bishop Alaric Thorne, a man whose ambition often overshadowed his piety and genuine spiritual leadership, along with his sycophantic lackey, Deacon Silas Croft, decided that my unwavering commitment to transparency and serving the poor stood directly in the way of their own deeply corrupt agenda. They meticulously set a trap so cunning, so cruel, that it not only threatened to destroy my personal reputation, but also aimed to tear apart the very fabric of the church I had painstakingly dedicated my life to building. I stood there, bewildered, as the truth was expertly twisted into a devastating lie that would haunt my every waking moment for years to come. Listen to my story to the very end and tell me, what would you have truly done in my place? That fateful Sunday morning, the air in St. Jude's was thick with devotion, the harmonious hymns echoing beautifully as I delivered my sermon, focusing on the profound importance of charity and selfless giving, a message that always resonated deeply with our congregation. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the church swung open with a jarring, unexpected thud, and 2 uniformed officers strode purposefully down the central aisle, their stern, unyielding faces immediately drawing every single eye in the packed sanctuary. A collective stunned gasp rippled audibly through the congregation, a wave of confusion and fear. They approached the altar, and my first instinct was to believe it was some kind of urgent emergency, perhaps someone desperately needing spiritual solace or immediate medical attention. But then, one of them held up a crisp, official-looking piece of paper, an arrest warrant with my name boldly printed on it. My mind raced, utterly unable to comprehend the surreal nightmare unfolding, the sacred solemnity of the moment shattered by this unbelievable public intrusion, a profound sacrilege in the very house of God. The officer's voice, devoid of emotion, cut sharply through the stunned, horrified silence, accusing me, Father Michael Sterling, of the unthinkable embezzling church donations specifically earmarked for our vital community outreach programs. It was an outright lie, a monstrous, calculated fabrication designed with chilling precision to destroy everything I had ever stood for and believed in. I looked out at the sea of faces of my parishioners, seeing their initial shock slowly morph into confusion, then doubt, and finally, a deep, heart-wrenching sense of betrayal that pierced my soul. Bishop Thorne, who had been sitting prominently in the front pew, rose slowly, his face a carefully constructed mask of feigned sorrow, shaking his head subtly in a gesture of profound disappointment. He mumbled something about irrefutable financial records, words that resonated with an insidious, poisonous weight, expertly planting insidious seeds of suspicion and distrust in the hearts of my faithful flock. My desperate pleas of innocence were utterly lost in the rising murmurs, the whispers of disbelief and condemnation that crushed my spirit more profoundly than any physical handcuffs ever could. This wasn't merely an accusation. It was a public execution of my character, my sacred calling, and my entire existence. With the crushing weight of those false accusations pressing down upon me, I felt the cold, unforgiving metal of handcuffs clamped tightly around my wrists, a sound that echoed like a death knell in the hallowed halls of St. Jude's, silencing any last vestiges of hope. Stripped of my priestly vestments, my hard-earned reputation, and my fundamental freedom, I was led away, a spectacle of shame, through the very aisles where I had baptized countless infants, married joyous couples, and offered solace to the grieving. Now I walked under the accusing, disdainful gaze of those I had faithfully served for so long. The vibrant life I had meticulously built, a life centered entirely around unwavering faith and selfless service, was instantly reduced to the chilling, sterile confines of a local jail cell, a stark and brutal contrast to the warmth of my parish. My spiritual authority, once unquestioned and revered, was now a public mockery, utterly shattered by a vile conspiracy that defied all logic and human decency. The despair that washed over me was overwhelming, a suffocating blanket that threatened to extinguish my very soul, replaced only by a burning, righteous anger at the sheer, unadulterated injustice I was enduring. In the bewildering, agonizing days that immediately followed, the wider church community, meticulously fueled by carefully leaked fabricated stories and Bishop Thorne's cunning, manipulative pronouncements, swiftly and decisively turned against me. The ravenous media, always eager for a scandalous headline to boost ratings, shamelessly portrayed me as a fallen idol, a hypocrite who had disgracefully betrayed his sacred trust and the faith of his flock. While a small, fiercely loyal group of parishioners quietly and secretly rallied around me, offering what little support they could, their brave voices were tragically drowned out by the overwhelming, unified wave of public condemnation and scorn. The deepest, most agonizing cut came during a brief, televised arraignment. There, Bishop Thorne, with a performance worthy of an actor, shed carefully rehearsed crocodile tears as he spoke eloquently of my moral failings, twisting the knife deeper into my wounded spirit and cementing my fabricated guilt in the public eye, even before any semblance of a formal conviction. It was a calculated, brutal performance, masterfully designed to ensure that no one would ever look at Father Michael Sterling the same way again, leaving me utterly alone and spiritually isolated in my darkest, most desperate hour. Listen to this story to the very end, and tell me what would you have truly done in my place. My name is Michael Sterling, and at 48 years old, I've seen enough to know that betrayal can strike even in the holiest of places. I was a priest at St. Jude's Parish, devoted to God and my community. But one Sunday, while I was delivering a sermon about selfless giving, my world was torn apart. Two uniformed officers, their faces stern and unyielding, strode down the aisle, right to the altar. They held an arrest warrant with my name on it, accusing me of embezzling the very donations I preached about. It was a public humiliation, a monstrous lie orchestrated by Bishop Alaric Thorne and Deacon Silas Croft, designed to destroy everything I had built in God's name. They accused me, Father Michael Sterling, of the unthinkable, embezzling church donations meant for our vital community outreach programs. A monstrous, calculated fabrication designed with chilling precision to destroy everything I ever stood for and believed in. I looked out at the sea of faces, seeing their initial shock slowly morph into confusion, then doubt, and finally, a deep, heart-wrenching sense of betrayal that pierced my soul. Bishop Thorne, sitting prominently in the front pew, rose slowly, his face a carefully constructed mask of feigned sorrow, mumbling about irrefutable financial records, words that resonated with an insidious, poisonous weight. His words, expertly planting insidious seeds of suspicion and distrust in the hearts of my faithful flock, crushed my spirit more profoundly than any physical handcuffs ever could. My desperate pleas of innocence were utterly lost in the rising murmurs, the whispers of disbelief and condemnation that swept through the sacred space. This wasn't merely an accusation. It was a public execution of my character, my sacred calling, and my entire existence, performed right before the eyes of those I had faithfully served for over 2 decades. It was a profound sacrilege in the very house of God. With the crushing weight of those false accusations pressing down upon me, I felt the cold, unforgiving metal of handcuffs clamped tightly around my wrists, a sound that echoed like a death knell in the hallowed halls of St. Jude's, silencing any last vestiges of hope. Stripped of my priestly vestments, my hard-earned reputation, and my fundamental freedom, I was led away, a spectacle of shame, through the very aisles where I had baptized countless infants, married joyous couples, and offered solace to the grieving. Now I walked under the accusing, disdainful gaze of those I had faithfully served for so long. The vibrant life I had meticulously built, a life centered entirely around unwavering faith and selfless service, was instantly reduced to the chilling, sterile confines of a local jail cell, a stark and brutal contrast to the warmth of my parish. My spiritual authority, once unquestioned and revered, was now a public mockery, utterly shattered by a vile conspiracy that defied all logic and human decency. The despair that washed over me was overwhelming, a suffocating blanket that threatened to extinguish my very soul, replaced only by a burning, righteous anger at the sheer, unadulterated injustice I was enduring, marking the beginning of a path from which there would be no turning back. The jail cell was a stark, brutal contrast to the warmth of my parish, a concrete box stripped of any comfort or dignity. Every night, the metallic clang of the lock echoed in my ears, a constant reminder of my new, terrifying reality. I lay on a thin cot, staring at the cold, unfeeling ceiling, the vibrant life I had meticulously built, now nothing more than a distant, fading memory, replaced by the suffocating silence of false accusation. It was a cruel, relentless assault on my spirit, and I wondered how much more I could possibly endure before my faith itself began to crack under the immense pressure. Stripped of my priestly vestments, I was no longer Father Michael, the shepherd of St. Jude's, but merely inmate 36,641, a number in a system that cared nothing for truth or justice. My identity, so deeply intertwined with my calling, had been violently torn away, leaving a gaping wound in its place. The simple act of looking in a mirror became an agonizing ordeal, seeing not the man of God I once was, but a hollowed-out reflection of public shame and undeserved disgrace, a stranger staring back with haunted eyes. The financial repercussions hit swiftly and mercilessly, adding another layer of despair to my already shattered existence. My bank accounts, modest as they were immediately frozen, labeled as assets under investigation related to the alleged embezzlement. Every penny I had saved, every small provision for my humble future, vanished overnight, leaving me utterly destitute and dependent, a stark reality for a man who had always prided himself on self-sufficiency and simple living. It felt like another calculated move to utterly break my spirit. News of my arrest spread like wildfire, not just through the church community, but across the entire city and beyond. My name, once synonymous with compassion and unwavering faith, was now dragged through the mud, a byword for hypocrisy and betrayal. Strangers on the street, once quick with a respectful greeting, now averted their eyes or whispered condemnations as I was transported to and from court appearances, their judgment a heavy burden on my already aching soul. The media, ever hungry for scandal, feasted on my downfall with an almost ghoulish delight. Tabloid headlines screamed, "Fallen priest," and "Saint or sinner," while local news channels ran endless replays of my public arrest, dissecting every detail with morbid fascination. They painted me as a monster, a wolf in sheep's clothing, completely ignoring 2 decades of dedicated service and the countless lives I had touched with God's Word. It was a relentless, dehumanizing assault on my character. The public perception of me shifted from revered spiritual leader to a figure of scorn and disgust almost overnight. People who had once sought my counsel, confessed their sins, or entrusted their children to my care, now looked at me with open contempt, their faces a mixture of anger and profound disappointment. I was no longer a symbol of hope, but a stark warning, a cautionary tale of a man who had supposedly fallen from grace in the most spectacular and public way imaginable. In the oppressive silence of my jail cell, isolation became my constant companion, a heavy blanket that smothered any lingering hope. The days blurred into weeks, each one a monotonous cycle of despair, punctuated only by the occasional, emotionless interactions with guards, or my overwhelmed public defender. The weight of the false accusations pressed down on me, a physical ache that never truly subsided, leaving me feeling utterly alone in a world that had seemingly abandoned me. My faith, once an unshakable anchor, was now tested in ways I never thought possible. I spent countless hours wrestling with God, questioning His plan, His silence, His seeming indifference to the injustice unfolding around me. How could He allow this to happen to His servant, to the very church I had dedicated my life to building? The internal struggle was as agonizing as the external humiliation, threatening to shatter the very core of my spiritual being. Yet, amidst the overwhelming darkness, a small, fiercely loyal group of parishioners refused to believe the lies. They smuggled in letters of encouragement, quiet prayers, and even small, hidden tokens of their unwavering support. Their brave voices, though tragically drowned out by the course of public condemnation, were a lifeline, a flickering ember of hope that reminded me not everyone had turned their backs, that true faith still existed, even for me. But for every loyal soul, there were dozens who abandoned me, without a second thought. Friends I had shared meals with, colleagues I had served alongside, even distant family members, all distanced themselves, fearing association with the disgraced priest. Their silence spoke volumes, a chilling testament to how quickly trust can erode under the relentless assault of public opinion and carefully orchestrated lies, leaving me feeling utterly discarded. The humiliation extended to my former peers, other priests and deacons I had known for years. In the brief public encounters during court proceedings, their eyes would dart away, unable or unwilling to meet mine, a clear sign of their discomfort and unspoken judgment. Bishop Thorne and Deacon Croft, however, would often offer a performative sigh or a shake of the head, their feigned sorrow a thinly veiled mask for their malicious satisfaction at my downfall. The threat of excommunication from active ministry hung over me like a guillotine, severing my connection to the sacred calling I had embraced since youth. My entire life's purpose, the very essence of who I was being systematically dismantled, brick by painful brick. The thought of never again standing at the altar, never again offering solace or guidance to a congregation, was a torment almost unbearable, a spiritual death sentence. The deepest cut came during a brief, televised arraignment, a public spectacle designed to further my humiliation. Bishop Thorne, a master of manipulation, delivered a performance worthy of an actor, shedding carefully rehearsed crocodile tears as he spoke eloquently of my moral failings. His voice, dripping with feigned sorrow, resonated across the airwaves, expertly twisting the knife deeper into my wounded spirit. His words, so carefully chosen and delivered with such insidious conviction, cemented my fabricated guilt in the public eye, even before any semblance of a formal conviction. They were a poison, seeping into the collective consciousness, ensuring that no one would ever look at Father Michael Sterling the same way again. It was a calculated, brutal performance, leaving me utterly alone and spiritually isolated in my darkest, most desperate hour. Deacon Silas Croft, Thorne's sycophantic lackey, reveled in my public disgrace, his smug expressions and whispered calumnies adding fuel to the fire. He was always lurking in the background during court appearances, nodding gravely at Thorne's pronouncements, his presence a constant reminder of the insidious forces working against me. His thinly veiled glee was a bitter pill to swallow, a clear sign of their shared corrupt agenda. One particularly galling moment was seeing Bishop Thorne, with Croft by his side, presiding over a grand church event, a charity gala I had initiated years prior. They stood on stage, basking in the spotlight, accepting accolades and donations, all while I languished in a cell, accused of stealing the very funds I had worked tirelessly to raise. It was a symbolic defeat, a cruel mockery of all I had once stood for, and it burned with a cold, unforgiving fire. The rectory, my home for over 2 decades, was cleared out, my meager personal belongings packed into boxes and sent to a storage unit I couldn't afford. The small, familiar comforts of my life, my books, my worn Bible, the simple cross on my wall, were all gone, leaving me truly homeless and stripped of everything. It wasn't just a loss of property, it was the erasure of my past, a violent severing of ties to the life I once knew. The despair that washed over me was overwhelming, a suffocating blanket that threatened to extinguish my very soul. I hit rock bottom, a place where hope seemed a cruel illusion, and the future stretched out as an endless, desolate wasteland. There were days I simply stared at the wall, unable to move, unable to pray, feeling utterly broken, a shattered vessel with no purpose left to fulfill in this world. The physical toll was evident in my gaunt reflection. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed, haunted by nightmares of my public arrest and the accusing faces of my flock. Food held no appeal, and my once robust health dwindled, leaving me feeling constantly weak and weary. Every day was a struggle, a battle against the crushing weight of injustice that threatened to consume me entirely, body and spirit. In those darkest moments I wrestled with profound doubt. Had God truly abandoned me? Was I, a man who had given his life to him, simply forgotten, left to languish in this hell of false accusations? The whispers of the enemy were loud, questioning my worth, my purpose, even the very existence of the divine justice I had always preached. It was a battle for my soul, fought in the confines of a cold, lonely cell. But even in the deepest pit of despair, something began to stir within me, a flicker of resilience that refused to be extinguished. The initial shock gave way to a simmering anger, not a destructive rage, but a righteous indignation at the blatant injustice. This wasn't just about me. It was about the truth, about God's name being tarnished by corrupt men. That thought became a tiny ember. That ember slowly grew, transforming from mere anger into a quiet, unyielding determination. I realized that simply enduring this injustice was not an option. It would be a surrender to the darkness. My suffering, my humiliation, would not be in vain. It would become the crucible in which a new resolve was forged, a steely will to see the truth prevail, no matter the personal cost. I found solace and strength in the worn pages of the Bible, smuggled to me by a kind guard. A particular verse, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought into the open," Luke chapter 8, verse 17, resonated deep within my spirit. It wasn't just a promise. It was a divine directive, a clear sign that God had a plan, and I was to be an instrument of His unveiling truth. My purpose became clear. I would fight back, not with violence or hatred, but with the unwavering truth, with God's guidance, and with every ounce of strategic intelligence I possessed. This wasn't about personal vengeance in the worldly sense, but about restoring justice to St. Jude's, cleansing the church of corruption, and upholding the sacred trust that Bishop Thorne and Deacon Croft had so flagrantly betrayed. The path ahead would be long, fraught with danger and further setbacks, but my spirit, though wounded, was no longer broken. A quiet resolve settled deep within my soul. I would rise from these ashes, not for myself, but for the countless faithful whose trust had been shattered, and for the glory of God. This was the beginning of my journey, a shepherd's reckoning, and there would truly be no turning back. My lowest point, that concrete box, was where God chose to reveal Himself in a way I could never have imagined. One night, as despair threatened to swallow me whole, a brilliant, otherworldly light began to emanate from the corner of my cell, not harsh or blinding, but warm and profoundly serene. It wasn't a trick of the mind, nor a dream. It was real, a palpable presence that filled the small space, pushing back the shadows of my prison and the darkness in my soul. I stared, utterly mesmerized, feeling a peace I hadn't known since my arrest. It was a clear sign, a divine touch, reminding me I was not forgotten. And then, within that radiant glow, a figure began to form, unmistakable and majestic. It was Jesus Christ himself, standing before me with an expression of infinite love and sorrow, his eyes piercing through my anguish and straight into my spirit. He didn't speak words aloud, but a profound message permeated my very being. My son, your suffering is not in vain. The truth will prevail, and you are an instrument of my justice. The vision lasted only moments, but its impact was eternal, washing away my despair and replacing it with an unshakable resolve. What makes this so incredible, so undeniably real, is that I wasn't the only one who saw it. A hardened night guard, a man I knew to be cynical and world-weary, happened to be making his rounds and looked through the small window of my cell door. He saw the light, he saw something, and though he couldn't explain it, his face was pale with shock and awe. His hurried report, though initially dismissed by the authorities, quickly spread through the jail and beyond, becoming a whispered legend, a divine phenomenon. This inexplicable event, this miracle in a jail cell, started to ignite public discourse outside the prison walls. While Bishop Thorne and the church hierarchy quickly dismissed it as hallucinations or psychological distress from my ordeal, the story took root in the hearts of many. It sowed seeds of doubt about my guilt, not just among my loyal parishioners, but even among those who had condemned me. How could a man accused of such a heinous crime be chosen for such a profound spiritual experience? It affirmed my inherent purity in the spiritual realm. This event, this divine intervention, became my hidden shield. It didn't magically free me, but it gave me an aura of divine favor, a quiet protection that even my enemies couldn't entirely shake off. My connection with Jesus Christ deepened immeasurably, transforming my despair into an unwavering resolve, a patient and strategic determination. I truly believed, with every fiber of my being, that I was now an instrument of divine justice, chosen for a purpose far greater than my own vindication. Bishop Thorne and Deacon Croft, blinded by their own ambition and arrogance, completely missed the profound shift within me. They saw me as a broken man, defeated and disgraced, locked away with no hope of ever recovering. They underestimated my faith, my resilience, and certainly my mind. They believed I was simply a compassionate shepherd, perhaps too naive for their cutthroat world of church politics and financial schemes. They thought I was out of the game for good. What they failed to grasp was that beneath the gentle demeanor of Father Michael Sterling lay a keen, analytical mind. Years of theological study had not only deepened my faith, but it also sharpened my intellect, teaching me to dissect complex problems and understand intricate systems. I had always been a strategic thinker, a skill I often used to organize community projects and navigate parish politics, but now it would be applied to a far more personal and profound mission. My innate talent for strategic planning, previously used for organizing food drives or fundraising events, now found a new, urgent purpose. In the quiet solitude of my cell, I began to piece together the events, to analyze Thorne's motives, and to anticipate his next moves. My mind, far from being shattered, became a precise instrument, meticulously charting the landscape of betrayal and identifying potential weaknesses in their meticulously crafted scheme. I was planning, not just reacting. Just as God provided spiritual guidance, He also sent a most unexpected earthly ally. Sarah Jenkins, a disgraced investigative journalist, was intrigued by the divine phenomenon story surrounding my imprisonment. Her career had been ruined by a powerful politician she had tried to expose, leaving her with a chip on her shoulder and a nose for corruption. She sensed a deeper conspiracy in my case, a story beneath the headlines, and reached out, offering her considerable skills. Sarah wasn't religious, but she understood injustice. She saw the miracle as a potential crack in Thorne's narrative, a reason to dig deeper. Her professional reputation might have been in tatters, but her investigative instincts were sharp as ever. She had contacts, a knack for research, and a fearless determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. She was exactly the kind of ally I needed, someone who could operate in the secular world I was currently cut off from. Our partnership was forged in adversity, a priest unjustly accused and a journalist unjustly disgraced, both seeking truth. Sarah's initial skepticism about the divine vision slowly gave way to a grudging respect for my unwavering faith and clear-headed resolve. She saw not just a victim, but a man with a plan, and she recognized the potential for a powerful story that could redeem both our reputations, but more importantly, expose real corruption. Thorne and Croft were so consumed by their victory, so sure of my permanent downfall, that they never considered I might have hidden strengths or unexpected help. They never imagined a former priest, exiled and alone, would possess the strategic acumen to dismantle their elaborate scheme. And they certainly never anticipated an unlikely alliance with a journalist, a woman whose professional demise they probably celebrated, would become their greatest threat. Their hubris was their blind spot. This combination, my renewed faith, my sharpened intellect, the divine sign, and Sarah's investigative prowess, planted the seed of retribution. It wasn't a thirst for personal revenge, but a burning desire for divine justice to be served. I knew I couldn't fight them with brute force or worldly power, but I could fight them with truth, strategy, and the unwavering conviction that God was on my side. The game was far from over. From that moment on, the path became clear, though difficult. I saw the pieces of the puzzle, the subtle ways Thorne and Croft had woven their web of deceit, and I began to see the threads that could unravel it. The feeling of inevitability settled upon me, not a vengeful certainty, but a quiet, spiritual conviction that God's plan would unfold, and I would be His humble instrument. They had underestimated the power of a man armed with faith and a sharp mind. My fall had been public and devastating, but my rise would be strategic and divinely guided. The world saw a broken priest, but God had seen a vessel for His truth. Thorne and Croft believed they had won, that they had silenced me forever. But they had merely ignited a fire within me, a holy fire that would burn away their corruption and cleanse St. Jude's parish. The tide was about to turn, not by my might, but by His grace. Before I reveal how this divine reckoning unfolded, it's incredibly important that you subscribe to this channel and leave a like on this video. Doing so helps YouTube recommend this powerful story to more people, allowing us to spread the gospel through real-life testimonies like mine. So please, help us in this noble cause. The day of the diocesan conference, a day Bishop Thorne intended to be his crowning glory, finally dawned. He planned to announce his visionary property deals, solidifying his power and wealth, but I, along with Sarah and my quiet network of loyalists, had painstakingly prepared a very different script. For weeks, we had worked tirelessly, meticulously piecing together every shred of evidence, every corrupted transaction, every whispered confession, every documented lie. The hidden ledger, a damning compendium detailing years of Thorne's illicit activities, was our trump card, a secret weapon tucked away right under his nose within the church archives. Our timing had to be perfect, our delivery undeniable, leaving no room for his usual slick deceptions or his ability to twist narratives. It felt like walking into the lion's den, a place of immense danger and uncertainty, but a profound, spiritual calm settled over me. God was my shield, and His truth, I firmly believed, would be my sword in this righteous battle. The weight of years of injustice pressed on me, but so did the unwavering resolve forged in my darkest cell. Sarah, with her seasoned investigative instincts and fierce determination for truth, launched our first major offensive with surgical precision. She strategically leaked irrefutable evidence of Thorne's clandestine property dealings to key financial regulators and several trusted, independent members of the press. This wasn't a mere whisper, it was a carefully orchestrated thunderclap, designed to hit hard and fast, creating an inescapable buzz just as Thorne prepared for his grand unveiling. The meticulously gathered documents proved his avarice beyond a shadow of a doubt, detailing how he planned to sell off valuable, historic church properties to a corrupt real estate developer, using the embezzled donations from our community outreach programs as a substantial down payment for his personal gain. The truth, painstakingly uncovered and now undeniable, began its inexorable journey into the unforgiving light of public scrutiny, threatening to unravel his entire empire of deceit before he even uttered a word. Simultaneously, my loyal parishioners, the new congregation I had cultivated at the remote rural mission, quietly and effectively spread the truth within their respective church communities and beyond. They shared stories, subtle hints, and undeniable facts, gleaned from my detailed analysis and Sarah's research, creating a groundswell of genuine discontent and moral outrage against Thorne. This wasn't a loud, aggressive protest, but a quiet, powerful movement from within, challenging the carefully constructed narrative Thorne had used to manipulate the faithful. The seeds of doubt I had sown earlier, nurtured by the miracle in my jail cell, and the subsequent divine phenomenon, now blossomed into widespread questioning of his integrity and leadership. People who had once revered him were finally opening their eyes, connecting the disparate dots, and beginning to see his true corrupt nature, eroding his authority from the ground up, brick by painful brick. The conference hall buzzed with an almost palpable tension and anticipation, as Bishop Thorne, radiating an almost sickening smug confidence, strode purposefully to the podium to unveil his visionary plans. He had, of course, gone to great lengths to ensure I was not invited, believing me to be permanently silenced and disgraced. Yet I was there, a quiet, almost invisible presence at the back, my humble attire a stark contrast to the opulent vestments of the hierarchy. My heart pounded in my chest, not with fear, but with a profound and righteous resolve that had been forged in the crucible of my suffering. When he began to speak, his voice booming with false authority and feigned piety, I felt an unshakable, calm certainty settle over me. This was it. The moment had arrived for God's truth to pierce through the layers of deceit and expose the deep-seated darkness he had so meticulously cultivated within our sacred institution, an institution I had loved and served for so long. As Thorne paused for applause, I rose slowly, my movements deliberate and measured, and began to walk purposefully down the central aisle, the hidden ledger and other incriminating documents clutched firmly and visibly in my hand. A ripple of gasps swept through the packed hall, followed by a stunned, deafening silence as Thorne's eyes widened in a mixture of disbelief, panic, and dawning horror, his face draining of all color. I didn't shout or accuse directly. Instead, I spoke calmly, my voice clear and steady, presenting the meticulously gathered evidence with an undeniable clarity. I drew powerful parallels to biblical figures of false prophets and corrupt leaders, letting the moral weight of God's unassailable word, combined with the irrefutable financial reports and compelling testimonies, speak for itself. The congregation, initially bewildered, now fully engaged, began to connect the damning dots, their faces shifting from confusion to dawning outrage, and a deep, righteous indignation at the betrayal they were witnessing. Thorne, utterly caught off guard and stripped of his usual composure, stumbled through a pathetic, desperate attempt at denial, his carefully constructed facade crumbling irrevocably before everyone's horrified eyes. He stammered, contradicted himself, and tried to discredit me, but it was far too late. The overwhelming, meticulously presented evidence, coupled with the moral weight of my unwavering words and the public's now undeniable awareness of his deep-seated corruption, left him utterly exposed and indefensible. Before the conference could even officially conclude, officials from the diocese, already alerted by Sarah's carefully timed leaks and now witnessing the unfolding chaos, moved swiftly to suspend him immediately from his duties. Local authorities, also present after receiving Sarah's information, then moved in, arresting him on the spot for fraud, embezzlement, and various other illicit activities. Deacon Croft, Thorne's sycophantic lackey, also found himself implicated by the very same damning ledger, his smug smile replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror as his own downfall became inevitable. As Bishop Thorne was led away in handcuffs, his once proud shoulders slumped in utter defeat, his face a mask of profound public humiliation, I looked at him. There was no triumph in my gaze, no gloating satisfaction, but rather a profound sorrow for the man he had become, and a quiet, spiritual sense of forgiveness for the immense pain he had caused. The truth, like light, cannot be hidden forever, I said softly, my voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the undeniable weight of years of injustice and the unwavering certainty of divine reckoning. It always finds its way home. My victory wasn't about personal accolades or regaining my old position at St. Jude's. It was about the restoration of truth, the cleansing of a corrupt system, and the quiet, humble return of justice to God's house and to the faithful who had been so cruelly deceived. I then returned to my humble mission in the countryside, a shepherd who had truly seen a reckoning, having fulfilled God's purpose and found my true calling in serving the overlooked, free from the burdens of worldly ambition.